Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. So recently I decided to make a new garden fence for my front garden. I wasn't happy with the design of the old one and it was looking a bit tired. So in this video I'd like to show you how I made a new picket fence for my front garden out of salvaged wood. I started off by removing the old fence. I wasn't too happy with the design when I made it. The gaps I think are a bit too wide, so I want to change that. And it just generally looks a bit tatty. You can see a local cat has been using it as a scratching post. So I found what I think are mostly ceiling joists thrown out. Some nice timber here. I had to remove loads and loads of screws and nails from it, but I've got some good usable wood here for future projects. So I started off by making the vertical supports for the fence. And now I'm just measuring up and marking up. So these verticals were around 98 centimeters tall, and these posts are about 9.5 centimeters wide by about 5.5 centimeters deep, so quite chunky. I cut out any waste areas where there's chips and damage to the wood. Made the most of what I had. Luckily a lot of this wood was in really good condition, and I used the speed square to help me to guide the circular saw when making the cuts. Now onto the horizontal supports, and for this they're going to be around 188 centimeters in length and of similar thickness, this post, but I'm going to cut it down on the table saw later on. So now to rip down the horizontal pieces to around 3 centimeters by 5 centimeters. I'm going to use lap joints to joint all this together, and I want the slats to sit sort of recessed with the vertical pieces. You'll see how that goes later on. So the horizontal supports are slimmer than the vertical supports. So now I need to mark up for the half lap joints that I'm going to be using to join all this together. Once I've made marks on the one, I could transfer these over to the other vertical post. And I'm going to be making the joints around 10 to 12 centimeters from the top and the bottom of the posts. I'm offering up the horizontal piece here as a guide so I know where to remove material. And for the depth of the cut, it will be roughly half the thickness of the horizontal support. So now, using a circular saw and the speed square to guide me, I made a cut either side of these joints, and I'm doing both posts at the same time, and then making a number of relief cuts. And then I could bash out most of this material with the hammer and remove the rest of the waste with a chisel.
And now I could offer up the horizontal supports and then mark out where I need to add the joints on these. One joint is right on the end and the other joint is slightly inwards because I'm going to increase the size of this fence from the original one. It's going to be about 25 centimeters longer, and you'll see how that looks later on. And again, just using a hammer to bash out all of that waste material and then cleaning up the joints with a nice sharp chisel. There you can see that this joint is not right on the end. This way I can increase the length of the fence, but I can still use the existing supports and I don't have to move them. This fence will be attached to metal supports that are concreted into the ground already. Now I wanted to add a roundover to the horizontal supports and the vertical supports, just to prevent any chipping or splitting, take off any sharp edges. So now I want to add a point onto each post, and I'm just working this out by eye, what looks right to me, drawing a line, finding a center at the top, and then joining these 2 points together to create a triangle. And then I cut out the shape with a handsaw. You could use a jigsaw for this or a miter saw, but I find you get nice straight clean cuts with a handsaw. Now to join the frame together, instead of just using wood glue, I'm going to mix up some fine sawdust with some outdoor glue, and that should just fill up any imperfections in the joints, any gaps in the joints, make it a little bit stronger. And I can also use this mixture to fill in any nail holes in the wood too. So once these 4 pieces are joined together, it should make a nice strong framework. I spread out the sawdust and glue mixture into the joints. And then I used the speed square just to make sure it's nice and square before adding screws. I'm using 40mm screws here. And I've got a countersinking bit there. And then I could fill in any little holes and imperfections in the wood with the leftover material. So now onto the slats. I'm going to be using pallet wood for the slats. I've got a mixture of boards, so what I'm going to do is use the narrowest board as a template in the table saw and then cut all the other boards to the same thickness. So they're all going to be around 8 centimeters wide. The depth of the boards varies, but you won't notice that once the fence is up. Only by a couple of mil or so each. So I started off now by marking up the first piece of around 98 centimeters or so, just under a meter, and I cut that out on the miter saw. Once that was cut, I could use that as a template for all the other boards. So for all these boards I cut a clean edge first and then use the template to mark the next cut. The slats are slightly shorter than the support posts, so that way they're slightly raised off the ground, which will prevent them from rotting. And for the point, as you can see, I've made a little template and I can transfer that over to all the boards and again use the handsaw to make the cuts. I did try a jigsaw, but I got a much better result with a handsaw. Now for assembly, so I've got one long piece of wood at the top to act as a guide, and then I've got another piece of wood which is the thickness of the gap I want, and I'm offering that up to the first vertical post and then adding a slat. I'm using 2 screws, 2 40mm screws, top and bottom. Once the first one was in, I could remove the spacer and then repeat the process, pushing each slat up against that piece of wood that you can see at the top there, and that's just keeping everything nice and straight. This was the easiest way I could think to do this. And I use screws here because in future, if any of these boards get damaged or rot, I want to be able to replace them easily. Again, I countersunk all of the screws so they sit nice and flush in the wood. And once I got going, this went quite fast. A nice satisfying process. Now on to the finish. I'm using Cuprinol Forest Oak. I think the wood looks quite good bare, but I did want to give it some protection just to make it last longer, and because all the wood is different, it will look more uniform this way. So in total I gave it 2 coats. Now I added some extra supports here. These are off an old banister, and I've put a 45-degree cut at the top so the rain drips off, and these are to connect it to the existing metal supports that are already in the ground. Once they were fitted, I gave them a coat of paint too. I added the 2 coats on the back of the fence, then I flipped it over to do the 2 coats on the front side. And finally, I just needed to install the fence into these existing metal supports. I could just offer up the fence and then use some squeeze clamps to get it in position. For the fixings, I'm using some stainless steel screws. Hopefully these will last longer outside. And I just drove 2 screws on each side. And that was the fence all done.
Okay, so that is about it for this video. So I think it looked alright in the end, considering it is just made out of some pallet wood and some old floor joists that I found. It just goes to show you don't always need to buy brand new timber. If you can find yourself some old wood, you can still make nice things out of it. So I hope you found this video useful and inspiring, and if you did, please remember to like and also consider subscribing for more DIY related videos. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.